Welcome back, everybody, to Simple Fun 360 Education Week. My name is Daniel, and I'm a training specialist here at BGL, and today's topic is on distribution tax automation. Very quickly, before we get started, as you might know, this is a part of the Simple Fun 360 Education Week. We do have 2 more webinars to go, and we have a large amount of recordings that are currently getting put up on BGL's YouTube channel, which you can feel free to go check out. All of these webinars are recorded, and I'll actually throw a link into the chat right now that links to the Simple Fun 360 Education Week playlist. That way, if you're looking to have a look at any of these topics on screen, you can go and review them at a later date. So I'll just chuck that in chat right now, along with another help article there that I'll be going through in just a moment. But firstly, we'll just get into some housekeeping matters. So as you might have noticed, all participants are on listen only mode. However, if you do have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom. I have a number of colleagues here with me, some from the training and documentation team, the product team, client success, as well as the support team, and all of them are more than happy to answer your questions as we go through. We will have a short section towards the end of the webinar where you can feel free to ask any questions there, and we'll be running through those at the end after I've completed all the content. So feel free to wait until then if it doesn't pertain to any of the information we're going through at that point in time. And as I mentioned, this webinar will also be recorded and posted on the BGL community as well as BGL's YouTube channel. The link for the community, if you are after that one, is just here, community.bglcorp.com, which is also where I got that first link to the SF360 Education Week playlist. Feel free to jump onto the community. It's a great place to be able to post questions as well as interact with other clients that use Simple Fun 360, as well as our other products as well. That way you can share information, build your knowledge base, and effectively get the most out of using Simple Fun 360. So, what is in today's webinar? It's all about distribution tax automation, specifically regarding that screen and entering your tax components. So we're firstly going to run through how that distribution tax automation process works and what exactly you can do on the distribution tax automation screen. We'll run through how to enter the system tax data and effectively how the system tax data works, entering custom tax data, so that is if tax data is not automatically supported by the system. And then finally, we'll run through reconciling these distribution tax components that you've entered. So, some prerequisites to using distribution tax automation we recommend, and it is necessary to have the fund processed to 30th of June, effectively to ensure that all changes to investment holdings is included in the fund, as well as all distributions have been processed. So that's the second point there. All cash distributions have been entered into the fund, and all corporate actions for the financial year have been processed. In order for the distribution tax automation screen to work correctly, you do need to ensure that all investment changes and all distributions have been processed to the fund. And the note there as well, the distribution tax components are to be entered prior to the year-end create entries. That is because you need to enter these tax components, then create entries afterwards, so that the create entries process can take these tax components and push them through to the tax return. So let's get into Simple Fun 360 and have a look at how that works. As I mentioned, we'll have a quick look at the distribution tax automation help article, and we're just going to search that up the top here in this search bar. You can do this for any help article that you're after, but if you just generally search for what you're looking for, you'll see a bunch of results. These first couple of things will bring you to certain pages, like the distribution tax automation page. Otherwise, we do have this help article here. So this is the help article that I linked before. It has a brief outline of what the screen does, as well as has instructions to navigate to the screen. It does have a list for the features that we will be going through today. However, what I wanted to point you to is specifically the supported securities. We did have a question already about where you can view what securities are supported for the system tax data. This is one of the options that is available. So you can go to the help article and say, I want to look for a security in the 2021 financial year. You open up this tab, you see if your security is in this list, and if it is supported for system tax data. There is also an option to look at this inside the software itself, and we'll run through that in just a moment. However, if your security is not on this screen, that means that the system tax data would not currently be supported, and we'll run through the process of how you could possibly submit tax statements and so that we can enter that into the system and make it supported in SimpleFund 360. We'll run through that a bit later in the webinar. So that's the article there. Very useful in case you get a bit lost with using the screen, but we'll actually jump back over to the screen now. So on the left side, we're going to select compliance and head to distribution tax automation. We do have a question right now. Is this part of the BGL subscription? Yes, it is. This service is completely free and included in the BGL subscription. So you don't need to pay any additional amounts in order to use the features mentioned today. So this is what the distribution tax automation screen will look like if you processed it towards the end of the year. As you can see, on the left side, we have a number of securities that are currently entered into the fund, and there are some symbols down the left side. This particular lightning bolt symbol mentions that this security has system tax data. If it doesn't have that symbol to the left of it, it means that system tax data is not supported, so you won't be able to select that one. The next thing I want to mention is this expand option here. If we click to expand all of these, you can see that there are a number of dates and a number of details relating to these. These lines here, with all the dates here, are all transactions in the fund. And I'll actually open up the transaction list as well. That way I can explain this just a little bit further. So let's have a look at this top one here. This is a transaction on 30th of June, 2020. Payment received in cash was $57.41. If we head to the transaction list and we were to search for that particular investment, you can see that we do have a transaction on 30th of June 2020 for $57.41. So when you enter transactions into the fund, they directly appear into the distribution tax automation screen. What about this second transaction? So this one has zero payment received. However, it does have a net cash distribution of $57.41. This is related to the tax components we're entering into for this particular investment. So this transaction is related to this nil transaction here. So $0 because there is a $0 payment received. But the details for these tax components are held in the more details section. So if we click into the transaction, select more, and look down, we can see that there is a number of tax components that have been entered, which correspond to the other details here shown on the distribution tax component screen. So what I wanted to get across there is that all of these particular transactions shown when you expand these open, they correlate to a transaction that has been entered into the system. When you do create a new line here to enter tax components, then it will correspond to creating a new transaction in the system. So what we're going to do is close these up here, and I'll explain some other features that we have related to it. I'll actually expand this one. And if we select this particular transaction, we're just mousing over it. On the right side, we have a couple options. We have an option to edit the transaction in this screen, in which we can enter the tax components, or we can choose to clear the components, and that will actually remove any of the tax data that exists. So for this first example, $57.41, if we were to click Clear Components, it'll prompt us if we want to proceed. If we proceed, then it has wiped the tax components from that particular transaction. Okay, so we'll collapse that one. And now looking at the security overall, you'll notice on the right side, we have a couple more options as well. So on the right side, you can see we have that lightning bolt icon as well, which is to generate the tax data. We have another icon showing to add a new transaction. So if you wanted to add another journal or bank statement related to this transaction, you can do so via this screen. And clicking this will just open a regular transaction that you can enter. The next option is to clear components. So if you wanted to clear all components for a particular security, so every single transaction that had tax components, you can clear that out as well. And you have the option as well to upload documents. So if you wanted to attach tax components, an annual tax statement, to your distributions, then you can do so here. The final option is a distribution event history. You can generate this for particular securities, so you can see who has edited and marked as incomplete any of these securities as well, so you can see what action has been taken in the screen. There is also the distribution event history for all of the items on the screen. As you can see here, there are a number of changes that I've made just to set up this fund to make sure it's correct. Now, you might be wondering, this particular security does have the ability to generate tax data based on the system tax data, but what about the other securities? So this one, Northern Star Resources, does not have that lightning bolt. Instead, it is replaced by the cogwheel that allows you to enter custom tax data. If we click this option, then it opens up the tax component screen and will allow us to enter these details as required. So if you don't have the option to automatically generate this tax data, you can enter that manually and basically select that and enter the annual tax statement that you have received. As for up the top, we'll just run through these particular options available here. We have the option to generate tax data. However, we can't actually do that until we select securities on the left side. If we choose to select a number of securities, you can see that we can choose to generate tax data. However, if you choose and select a security that is not supported for the system tax data, that option will actually be blanked out. So you can bulk process securities by selecting them and then clicking to generate tax data. However, if you select an option that is not available for the system tax data, it will not allow you to do so. Vice versa as well. If you wanted to bulk process securities that did not have any system tax data, you could do so as well. However, the moment you select one that does support system tax data, that is not available. The next option is to mark as reviewed. So once you're happy with a particular investment, let's say with GPT, that one has been sorted, the payment received does equal the net cash distribution, which is the end result we're looking for here. Then we can choose to select this particular security and mark it as reviewed. That will move it to the reviewed section. So we have incomplete and reviewed on the right side. And then we can review this from this screen if necessary, or we can select it and mark it as incomplete, which will bring it back to the incomplete screen. We have an option to clear components that I ran through earlier as well. And the next option here is for supported securities. This is what I mentioned. So in the help article, you can view the supported securities per the year there. But here, you can actually click on this option and search for a particular security and a financial year that you were looking for to see if there is tax data supported. So let's say we wanted to look for A200 because that's the top option we have. You can see that, yes, it has been released and updated on the 12th of August 2020. So we do have tax data for this particular security. So that's the option you can use to actually search for it in the software. Fairly recent release, and it's incredibly useful just to make sure that if you've got a security in there that does actually have tax data and it isn't showing it's currently supported, you can basically look in to see why that might not be working at that point in time. The next option is the distribution event history, which I went through earlier, and the distribution reconciliation report. We'll be going through that report at the end of the webinar today. Now, I've been seeing a number of questions about how you can submit your annual tax statements and whether that will be able to populate these the tax components fields. Here it comes to this particular question here, which also does exist in the help article. If distribution tax data is not available, what you can do is submit a request with an email, including the statements to distribution statements at bglcorp.com.au. So let me just open up this article here. So if you send through the annual tax statements, what we do request is that the security is held by 5 or more funds that you manage, and that any personal information is removed from those tax statements. That's basically to ensure that the data that we are receiving is accurate, and we can actually create a framework for the system tax data based on that. That's a good segue to actually explain how the system tax data works. Effectively, we get the data that is sent through the system in the annual tax statements, and we get an amount that we can, we get a value for each of the tax component fields. Effectively, what we can do then is estimate the amount that should exist in the tax component fields based on the unit holding as at 30th of June. And the best way to explain this is to actually have a look in one of these particular distribution tax components. So I'll click Generate Tax Data. That one actually doesn't have the unit value there. Here we go. So when you generate the tax data, you can see that the unit balance as at 30th of June 2020 is recorded at 100. The system will take the figures that we've figured out through the annual tax statements that have been provided, multiply that by 100, and enter it to the relevant field down the bottom here. So if, for instance, the calculations are a bit wrong and you notice that the annual tax statements don't quite match, what we do recommend is to ensure that the unit balance is correct up the top as well. So the process there is to just send through the annual tax statements to distribution statements at bglcorp.com.au. We'll work through them as quick as we possibly can in order to get them uploaded as system tax data. That way, then you'll be able to access that in Simple Fund 360. So that's an overall explanation. Let's get into how actually to use the system tax data. We're going to use this particular investment, TCL, and we see we have a payment received of $47. All we need to do is select this investment and click that lightning bolt to generate the tax data, or we can click this one up the top as well. So we have $100. The system has figured out that there is to be certain amounts in these tax components fields, which are currently adding up to $30 in non-primary production income, with a total of $30.86, including the franking credits. And then we have the net cash distribution of $47. This is the figure that we're worried about. The net cash distribution should match the payment received. So that $47 does actually match the $47 of cash that we've recorded during the year. If we're happy with that transaction, we can choose to generate and mark as reviewed. Now, as you can see, if we have a look at TCL and expand this, we actually have a new transaction down the bottom. This one has those tax details that we were just reviewing then. So you can see we have the $2 at franked, $28 in interest, and the net cash distribution does equal $47, which equals the payment received. Much like I mentioned before, we'll actually go to the transaction list and search for TCL. And you can see we have the description here for this transaction where it generated the tax data. If we were to have a look in this transaction, that is the tax data that we just reviewed. So that's a very simple way of how to use the system tax data. What if you had to enter the custom tax data in that case? So for this one, Northern Star Resources, we can choose to enter the custom tax data. From here, it'll open up the exact same screen. However, these tax component fields won't be completed at this point in time. So what we'd recommend is to take the annual tax statement and to enter the details into this screen. A quick note about these drop-down fields where it opens up the capital gains. You'll notice that they can all actually be collapsed. However, once you enter any sort of data into that particular field, the option to collapse this field will not become available. So if this field is collapsed, so this capital gains section currently is hidden, you can have confidence knowing that there's no data in that particular section. So you can go down, start entering all of your income. For the capital gains field, I would like to mention this toggle. So there's 50% or 1/3 toggle. This is purely for reconciliation purposes, because on the tax statements, it can show as per an individual or a super fund discount here. That way you can actually enter the details as per your tax statement and reconcile it with the tax statement there. This does not have an effect at this does not affect the tax return at the end of the financial year, as all of those are taxed at 1/3. However, it does allow you to just reconcile that, a bit more freedom to be able to make sure all of those details are correct. So going further down, you can enter the rest of the details as necessary and generate and mark as reviewed. Once you've done so, it'll create an identical transaction similar to the system tax data that we just created, and you can choose to select and mark that transaction, mark that security as reviewed. So it's a very similar process for the custom tax data, just that you're entering those details yourself. So next up, we'll just quickly look at reconciliation for distributions. So we can select the distribution reconciliation report up in the middle of the screen here, and that will open one of the reports. It'll show all the details that exist for the distributions in the fund, including the transactions that include payments received or that include tax data. So let's have a look at the TCL. TCL is actually up the top. So we have those 2 cash transactions. I'll actually just zoom in for us here. 2 cash transactions up the top, and then we have the tax data that we entered. So the system generated tax data there. On this particular screen, you'll notice the rate here that indicates S or I, which indicates whether it's taxed, showing that it's a tax at a super fund rate or an individual rate. And further down, you can see the total net cash distribution. If that does not actually reconcile, then you'll see that there is a red figure here saying there is a variance. So what we recommend after completing all of your distribution tax components via the screen is to look at that particular variance and effectively see if there's any issues that exist between the tax data you've entered and the payment that you have received. Scrolling down the bottom, you will see a totals field. So the total amount of payment received overall for distributions and the tax data that have been entered. And then there is a final section showing the amount that it will be entered into the gross trust distribution section of the tax return. There are a couple notes down here which are incredibly helpful for actually reconciling those figures on the tax return. For instance, as I mentioned, the rate of whether it's an S or I, an explanation for that one exists down the bottom here. So it says the discount rate selected for the transaction, S being super funds, and 1/3 at 1/3, and I being individuals at 50%. So if you were looking to figure out details about a particular section, such as the distributed capital gains, you can look to note 2, and you can see that it forms part of the net capital gains. That way you can actually have a look at that net capital gains figure on the tax return and then work back from there to reconcile those figures. So that's reconciling the distribution tax components. The last thing that I actually wanted to run through today are some issues that you may encounter when entering these tax components. So one issue, very common issue that we have come through with our support team is that you try to enter some figures into the tax components and it actually prompts you to say that the investment has already been fully disposed. I'm just going to jump back over to the transaction list so we can have a look at that. If you were to enter the tax components in the distribution tax automation screen as well, you would actually encounter the same issue. So I'm going to create a new journal. It's going to be in the next financial year, because that's actually what I need to do to trigger the error in this particular case. And we're going to choose A200. I'm going to make a nil transaction. And scrolling down in this tax component field, we'll go to this section. So we're looking for any of these 5 sections here. These actually affect the CGT cost base of the investment. So if you're trying to enter a figure in this field and there are no units available, it's going to prompt you with an error like so. So it says that the tax-deferred, tax-free, or AMIT cost-base adjustment components cannot be entered as the investment has been fully disposed in prior years or has no purchase parcel entered. If that is the case, what I would suggest is that you actually look at that investment in the transaction list and you're looking for any disposals that might have been incorrectly processed. If we go back to the transaction list and search by A200, we can see that there is a disposal here of 100 units that has been processed at 30th of June 2020. So those would be the transactions that I would suggest you hone in on. Make sure these transactions are recorded correctly. So disposals are recorded on correct days, or maybe you've disposed of too many units. That way you can actually change those. Let's say this was actually meant to be a 50 unit disposal. We'll change that to 50, and then we'll go back to create the journal once again. Go down to this column, add 5, and you can see it has actually accepted that number, which means that we do have a cost base that we can access to actually post these transactions. Now, I'll actually quickly see if I can show that. I'll actually show that in the distribution tax automation screen. So I just need to switch to the next financial period, 2021 financial year. And we can do A200 and we'll enter a bit of tax data. Same exact field, so AMIT cost-based net amount excess, but I do actually need to change that transaction back very quickly. So that transaction is changed back, and if we enter 5, that one is actually working. Let me just refresh that screen. Oh, the security doesn't show up on this screen just because it has been fully disposed. So that actually wouldn't be an issue in that particular case. However, if you do encounter that error when it comes through on the distribution tax automation screen, then you know what to look for in that particular case. That's just one of the errors that can occur. Otherwise, if you do have any further issues with entering your distribution tax automation components during the financial year at all, do feel free to contact us on live chats or support at BGL here and state the error that you might be receiving, and we'd be happy to assist with that and basically get those entered for you there. And that is an outline for the distribution tax automation screen. That is essentially everything you need to know, all the functions that are available. And we do want to stress the system tax data and being able to submit those tax statements if required. If you wanted to do so, I highly recommend it, as then you can automate the system for that financial year. Simply click one button and all your tax components are entered for you. You can very quickly reconcile that and make sure it's all correct. But thank you very much for your time today. I'd like to thank you very much for your time today, and thank you everyone who have assisted to answer the questions. We do have one more webinar that is occurring, I believe, at 3 p.m. today on T-Bars. So if you'd like to get down and join that one, feel free to use the community link on BGL Community to register for that one. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending today's webinar, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you.